Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So simple.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 27th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. You called us.
We're
We
here.
showed up. We came.
Podcasting makes us feel good.
We're here to bust some podcasts. The Podcast Busters. The Podbusters.
That's
what
got to
we
be
are.
a name of a podcast out there. I got to
I'm
look
sure
that
it
up.
is. There's no doubt.
There's
That's
no doubt,
been taken
yeah.
at some point.
Yeah. We can't take credit for that. In fact, we may owe money at some point right now. We just simply said it.
Yeah, that's a great point. We might have just copyright infringed on someone else's show. And
Well-
if that's the case, we apologize.
Better excuse for all of you listening to join our Patreon or VIP so that way we can get our money back.
Exactly. We have a new VIP episode out this week.
We do.
So you can go
yeah.
and check that out. Patreon, YouTube membership, Apple Podcast subscription.
Yep.
However you want to listen.
Yep.
That was a lot of fun.
It was. Yeah. Great stuff.
All right. We are here to talk about the new Ghostbusters film.
Mhm.
This is a franchise that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Brennan was still out, not feeling well. The great Tim Costa from First Time Watchers joined me, and we had a lively discussion about the Ghostbusters franchise.
Mhm.
And I guess I want to start there before we get into this, Brennan, especially because you weren't there. We don't have to
Yeah.
spend too much time on it, but broadly, quickly, what are your thoughts about the Ghostbusters franchise coming into this new one?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you specifically, JD. I mean, I guess it
Okay.
sounds like both you and Tim in some ways, because I feel like, especially for people our age, it really depends on how much we grew up with these movies. If there is a level of nostalgia there
Yeah.
wasn't for me. Like I never really grew up with these Ghostbusters films. I saw them at a young age, but I never really attached myself to them.
Yeah, sure.
And of the four, and I'm including the one that Paul Feig directed, of those four leading up to Frozen Empire, I think most of them are merely fine. I really like that first one. I think it's a lot of fun. I think Ghostbusters 2 is slightly underrated. I think it has some pretty good components to it. It's kind of a messy film, but I think it has some interesting ideas, and I think it ends pretty well. I don't hate the film that Paul Feig directed, the female Ghostbusters, or whatever you want to call it. That I think it's okay.
Yeah.
I think Afterlife is. I feel like that film is just merely from a filmmaking standpoint. I just don't think Jason Reitman's the kind of person for that type of like franchise film. I think the film just has very little personality to it, even despite some interesting ideas it might be going for. So at this point now, between the four, it's been diminishing returns. It's very rare for a franchise that's either 4 or 5 films deep where I would actually rank it just based on release order. And that's how I feel about Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And yeah, I'm mostly there with you to reiterate in case people didn't listen to that show I did with Tim a few weeks ago. I did not grow up with these films, so I do not have any sort of nostalgic tie to them. So as much as I love that original Ghostbusters, I equally don't hold it on some sort of classic pedestal, but I do think it's good. I think it's quite good, actually.
Yeah.
It's really funny. Maybe a little messy because its structure was very improvisational, and you can sense
it's
that at
very
times.
loose. It's very it's
Very
very
loose.
hangouty at times, which I appreciate, but I sometimes don't know if that's the right approach for a movie like that. That is very high concept, and I don't know if the balance is always there. But I
agree.
I like that about it in general. I like the idea, and I do think it's still pretty fun.
Well, and that's why I think Ghostbusters 2 is kind of underrated, because I think it's equally as fun, but they recognized how loose it was and tightened it up slightly. And I think some of that film, especially the romance of it,
I think that's pretty
is
effective.
a lot more effective.
I
Yeah.
also love the idea, just the general idea of Ghostbusters 2, how like even in just a short amount of time since that first film, the Ghostbusters themselves have become kind of obsolete. So they're resorting to basically doing birthday parties for kids.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty interesting idea.
I agree. I really like that a lot. It's a little bit of that Ocean's 12 to me, a little bit, in the sense that they have this huge heist, and then you open Ocean's 12, and it's like none of that really mattered at all. Like they go back to zero.
Yeah, basically,
Ghostbusters 2 is basically that.
It's basically Breathless to the Ghostbusters franchise.
Yeah, a little bit, and I do admire that. I think it's a lot of fun. The baby's adorable. I think there's a lot to like about Ghostbusters.
It has
2.
pockets that I like more than the first film, but I don't think it's a better film than the first film, if that makes sense.
That's fair. The disparity for me, and again, this could just be the lack of nostalgia or the lack of, I don't have deep passions for this franchise to begin with. But the disparity between those first two aren't that much for me. I really like them both. Then Ghostbusters in 2016, I agree. I liked it. Not sure if I loved it, but I liked it. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. It's certainly a little messy at times for sure.
Very,
but I did enjoy it overall. Afterlife, I did not catch up with until the week of that episode I did with Tim. Like I just flat out did not see that movie at all. And I think maybe because of that, I was not interested in it at all. And I watch it, and I agree from a filmmaking perspective, Jason Reitman doesn't inject any sort of personality into it. And honestly, tonally, it's quite strange. It is so different than any other Ghostbusters preceding it. It's sentimental. It's got more stakes. It's more emotional. There's more urgency. It's just a very different kind of Ghostbusters movie. Maybe again, if you don't have any deep tie to this franchise, maybe you can appreciate that a little bit, but it doesn't feel like a Ghostbusters movie tonally, but at the same time, and this is just my own sentimentality talking here, I did not expect it to be this love letter to Harold Ramis. And that admittedly did kind of work for me.
I think
as a
that
love
film's
letter to him.
I don't necessarily mind some of the stuff at the end. I know it's sort of subject to controversy in a lot of ways. I think Afterlife's biggest problem and the way it utilizes Harold Ramis is the idea that the three remaining Ghostbusters who have, kind of moved on with their lives kind of form this like distance from him because they saw him as, I guess, crazy for thinking the world was going to end, when in reality, you guys saved the world at least twice before together. Like, why would that be your distance with him? Like, I think the script
I agree. That doesn't make any sense.
It does not make any sense. And I think that's really the film's biggest problem is the setup is just too lazy. To really and
I agree with that. And also I would add that it tries to do the Force Awakens thing without the subversion. What I love about The Force Awakens, again, to reiterate, in case you've never heard me say this, I love that film and how it channels the original Star Wars because it very intentionally flips the coin at every turn. It is wholly subversive to the original Star Wars. And that's what makes its superficial plotting, for me, purposeful. What makes it worth it. And
Force Awakens was manufactured with a goal to take it from beginning, middle, and end. Where it sounds like with Ghostbusters Afterlife, it really feels as if the pitch for that movie and the overall goal was just its final 20 minutes. And then it's like, okay, now we need to come up with some type of movie that gets us to that point. And that's where I think it fails.
It regurgitates the same characters and plotting as the first Ghostbusters with no subversion, like no purpose whatsoever.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense. And then you add in what you're talking about there with Egon and how he set up in the film as it relates to his brethren. And it just, from a dramatic perspective, it just, and I understand, and again, maybe that just goes back to what we were saying about how this film just doesn't know what a Ghostbusters movie is.
No.
But I do appreciate the love letter aspect of it for whatever.
I like the idea of it. Yeah. In getting to that point, I think it is a bit misguided at times.
Yeah. Okay, so that leaves us with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the latest entry in this franchise. It is directed by Gil Keenan. And of course, it stars Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, McKenna Grace, Finn Wolfhard,
Mhm.
Patton Oswalt has a little appearance in here. Kumail Nanjiani as well.
Yeah.
Then you have the original Ghostbusters as well.
You do.
Making an
You
appearance
do.
once again.
Ernie
So-
Hudson, 78 years old.
Pretty wild. Looking
Whatever
pretty great for
whatever's in
78.
his water, I want.
Exactly. It really is amazing because you see the age on Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd for sure. Like
Yeah.
you do see that. He looks like he's 52. I don't
He's jacked.
understand.
So
Yeah.
ripped. Yeah.
It is.
What a healthy man. Yeah. Like, we can all learn a thing or two from him, I think.
I think so as well. All right. If you're not familiar with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, when the discovery of an ancient artifact unleashes an evil force, Ghostbusters, new and old, must join forces to protect their home and save the world from a second ice age. Okay.
Epic reading there. Epic reading.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Brendan, what did you think about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
Well, let's reiterate something we already said, that you and I don't really have the nostalgic relationship to this franchise that some others do. And I think that's going to tailor into our thoughts on Frozen Empire, because one thing that I've seen a lot of references to is how this film is reminiscent to the animated show The Real Ghostbusters, which I have not seen an episode of. And that might be true. Yeah, that might be true. So this might have a lot of, or it might take a lot of inspiration from that. And that kind of makes sense because this doesn't really feel like much of a movie. It feels more like an episode in a TV series. This does feel like something I maybe would have watched on Cartoon Network, if it were an animated property, like a 30-minute episode, a 30-minute thing. And then all of a sudden, like 1 week later, I get a new episode that more or less does the same thing, just changes the setup. That is what this feels like. And if people have that nostalgic relationship to that television show as well, I could see how this film would work for them. But I think it also gets into this question, where do you separate something that feels episodic from something that is still meant to feel like a movie? And I think that's the biggest disparity here, because as a movie, this is purely an empty experience, I thought. I don't think this really has anything to offer. It's this gets back into something I've talked about a lot, JD, especially with regard to superhero movies, more in particular the latest crop of DCEU films that have now just concluded, because so many of those films just reeked with obligation. Like they felt like passionless projects that were basically the equivalent of hot air. Were they terrible movies by definition? Maybe not. But sometimes it's even worse when you just don't have that kind of personality that makes those experiences memorable. And I think you need that kind of personality for a film that is high concept like this, that's meant to be a little weird. I mean, this is a Ghostbusters film still, and it just doesn't have any of that, which is why I did kind of hate the experience. I can't say it's a terrible movie, but I'm at a point now where I would prefer something that is actively worse that I'm going to remember. And this movie is nothing but plot. That's all this is. There's very little wit, very little cleverness to this. There are a few gags that are kind of interesting, involving like this possessor ghost that comes in and invades like a pizza or something like there are little things like that are a little bit clever. But I mean, this movie overall is still nothing but plot. There are a lot of characters it's trying to juggle around. It's actually kind of insane. It's I can't believe it even tries to do that. It certainly doesn't succeed. But yeah, this is my least favorite Ghostbusters film. This does carry the same, I guess, trend of diminishing returns here. The ranking of these 5 movies is release order for me, and it still continues. I'm not going to remember this one. I'm really not, and that's unfortunate to say.
Yeah, I think this film is fine. I can't say that I completely loathe the experience, but I didn't enjoy it either. I hate to phrase it this way, but I find myself completely apathetic with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
Isn't that like the worst thing to say about any movie, though, especially like this?
Yeah, I just wasn't moved one way or the other, and I just left, I guess, cold and completely distant. And maybe
cold,
that speaks
frozen.
to frozen. Yes, I was frozen in my seat like the characters in the film. And my tear ducts, they that was the last thing to freeze. They were right
It
about
just
that.
it just nothing was working. Nothing was
Just-
working.
It comes back to the approach to this franchise these days and how it completely misses what a Ghostbusters film should be, at least if we're going to compare it to those first two films that, again, I do really like, that I do think are good. These last two films, Afterlife and now Frozen Empire, they want to reach for something more sentimental, more emotionally, more dramatic urgency. And maybe that speaks to a shift in audience expectations, perhaps. I don't know. But given the response to these last two films, I don't know if that approach is successful or not. If I remember correctly, I think Afterlife made something like $215 million at the box office, which isn't great by today's standards.
No.
We'll see how this one fares, but it does seem as if they're pandering to a different type of audience than the 80s films were. I will say this. That approach to me, it just leaves me a little reserved, a little distant, a little frozen, if you will, when it comes to this franchise.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
I just didn't find the nostalgia here to be all that interesting. I feel like the nostalgia bait, which was so heavy-handed in Afterlife, to be actually as heavy-handed as it was, much more effective.
It's
than
more
what
memorable,
we
at
get
least.
here.
At
More
least I
memorable.
felt like in those moments it was kind of building towards it.
Yes.
Whereas here it's just so
it feels
like
more random and scatterbrained.
it's very passionless for one thing.
Yes.
And you're right, it is kind of random. Which in a way I could appreciate if it's as random as it is, as if to suggest, hey, the old cast is all back, but they just kind of exist in this world now. So it's like, okay, I kind of like just, you kind of pass by, you blink and you miss them. They're here to just kind of like support the new players. Like, I don't mind that idea, but I feel like it's a film that is still trying to, kind of trigger those nostalgic moments. It's trying to have that kind of relationship with its audience and its fans. And I think in that regard, it does fail.
I agree. And I think partially why it fails additionally is that it's juggling too many things. Where I criticized the first film for maybe being a little bit too loose, I much prefer that than all of the tightening and ratcheting we get with this film, because you have the nostalgia baiting sequences here, of course, and all of the plotting as you're talking about, and there is a lot of plotting to this film.
Wow.
But then you have the Gary Phoebe relationship and how that unfolds. There's the Phoebe Melody relationship and that dynamic. There's Trevor and Slimer. There's Gary and Callie and how that relationship's unfolding. And then there's Phoebe and Dr. Venkman, or not Venkman, Aykroyd's Stance.
Ray Stance. Yeah.
Ray Stance, how they're somewhat of a dynamic there throughout the film. And it's juggling all of these things and fails miserably at trying to articulate any coherency to it all. And then you add in Kumail Nanjiani and his presence in this film. You get that.
And Patton Oswalt, who's really just here for a glorified exposition dump.
Yes, which, to be fair, he has been stating that in interviews for this film, which is kind of hilarious that he's the nerdy exposition dump of the movie.
At least he's aware of it. I will say this, as far as a performance that stands out for me, I'd say Patton Oswalt is probably the standout, even though he's given
fun.
He at least takes advantage of it. And Kumail Nanjiani kind of does too. But I feel like for the most part, as great as Carrie Coon and Paul Rudd are, I love them as actors. They definitely feel like they're just here because they were required to show up for work today. I don't sense any passion to be here, honestly. It's the script obligated them to show up. That's all it feels like.
I completely agree. Again, I always go back to The Force Awakens because to me that is the gold standard of how to use legacy with doing something new and refreshing, something that's new and refreshing.
I think it's fair. I often cite Scream 4, but I think The
Or
Force
Scream
Awakens
4.
yeah.
There's certainly other examples where
Yeah.
you get a great blend of the two.
Yeah.
And how they use, let's say, Han in The Force Awakens.
Sure.
Absolutely love how that character is written in that film. It's incredible. You can sense a passion. There's a pathos to that character
Sure.
in that film that's remarkable. What is the purpose of Bill Murray being in this movie? He clearly does not care. And you get that moment at the end where he's like knocking, spoiler alert, I guess, where he's like knocking on the door, and it builds up this huge reveal that here is Dr. Peter Venkman. And it is the most stale, useless scene in this film. It doesn't render any sort of fist in the air moment. It's something that just simply exists here. Passionless is the exact phrasing I would use to describe it. It's just pandering for no reason.
The film also did a terrible job building towards it because the marketing showcases Bill Murray all over this film, so it's not a secret. And Bill Murray has a scene earlier on in the movie anyway. So it's like we know he's in the movie. We know he's going to show up. So there's no
a huge surprise.
Yeah, and it's not that it needs to be a surprise, but it feels like the movie is trying to build towards something.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do that, you need to do the work to justify the buildup, and it does not do that. It's too busy trying to play with these different narrative pieces. The movie feels like a chessboard, which is ironic because chess is actually a big, crucial part of this movie. And I got to speak to that as well. The dynamic between Phoebe and Melody. And Melody is a ghost here. And there's this like curiosity, this friendship that forms. I don't know if you saw it this way, but it also feels kind of romantic in a way. Like,
they have a chemistry. There is a chemistry there for sure.
Isn't that kind of weird when one of them's a ghost? Like, isn't there a word for that? Like, it's
I mean, it is a little weird. Honestly, I wish the film committed to that fully.
Same.
I wish that was.
I wish it was more
movie.
aware of that weirdness.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be. It thinks, oh, let's develop a tender relationship between ghost and human. Let's make it Casper-like. And it's like, okay, no, they take it to a certain level where it's okay. This is just getting awkward.
Well, because Phoebe clearly has a connection to Melody. In some way, she wants to know what it's like to be a ghost. Those are her first two questions.
Yeah.
And then at one point wants to manifest what it's like to have a physical exchange with Melody. And that also comes off the heels of a discussion that Phoebe has with Ray about, hey, have you ever thought about being a ghost before?
Yeah.
So it's something that the film clearly cares about. But because it's juggling all of these other things, as we talked about earlier, this does falter a little bit. That's probably why it feels a little awkward. Because if you just lean fully into it, if that's the primary through line here, and it's kind of embedded into that loose structure like the originals, I think there's potential for this to really be something. Because the chemistry there between McKenna Grace and Emily Aylin Lind is good. It is really good.
Yeah. And I guess like given the dynamic between them and just the fact that one of them is dead, like there's an icky weirdness to that in a way. And I think this movie needed a lot more literal slime to it. Like it needed more of a weirdness to it. Like as random as the scenes with Slimer are, like it is so shoehorned in just for nostalgic sake. It's at least a moment or a few moments rather where I felt like the film at least had some aesthetic personality. And I at least appreciated that, which the film does not have nearly enough of. I mentioned that possessor ghost at one point that at one point invades a pizza of all things, and this pizza's like moving around like an inchworm. That's at least kind of clever. Like I guess like I wanted more of that, and the film kept teasing that, but it never quite delivered. I don't know about you, but I think I only laughed once during this movie. There is one joke, and this is the music side of me kind of geeking out, where our main characters end up at this like testing facility of sorts, and they've got all of these possessed objects, and one of them is a CD player. Paul
Oh
Rudd
yeah.
picks it up, and it's like moving like Pac-Man. Paul Rudd picks it up like, oh, I used to have one of these, and the doctor says, "Careful, it's possessed by a bad Spin Doctor CD." It's like I laughed hard at that one, but
Yeah.
that didn't happen very often, unfortunately.
No, I agree. I don't think a lot of the humor lands, partially because there's a lot of plotting.
Yeah, it's
There's
not much.
a
There's not even much attempt at humor. It's
there's
mostly just
not
story.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like there's a lot of plotting, a lot of dramatic urgency, and then also some humor thrown in there. The
Mhm.
balance just keeps you off rhythm, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
I did appreciate some of the attempts with Kumail Nanjiani, and it just might be his comedic presence that
I think it's
might
more
make it work.
him than the script
Yeah.
or the direction. Or
Yeah,
anything.
it's probably less the gags themselves, and it's just his performance because he is a funny actor, and I do really like him. Same thing
Yeah.
with Patton Oswalt. It's not
Same. Yeah.
what he's saying as much as it's how he's delivering
the
it
delivery,
in a Patton
yeah, yeah.
Oswalt kind of way.
Right.
And when you know the nerdy side of Patton Oswalt, as we all do, it does make that impeccable casting.
I couldn't help but think of his wish list for Star Wars. Remember
Yeah,
that? Is that what
absolutely.
you're thinking
Your
of?
mind
And he says,
immediately goes
and
there.
he's like says like Thanos shows up. It's
Exactly. Like you
Yeah.
you go there because that is ultimately the bit he's doing here, but in a more
Yeah.
Ghostbustery setting
yeah.
instead of Star Wars and Marvel. But yeah, no, that's great casting. Kumail, I really enjoyed. So they did, if they didn't elicit laugh out loud humor from me, I at least enjoyed the little bits that they have
Yeah.
here, primarily because of their performances.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. They certainly are the standouts because they certainly know how to take advantage of what's not on the page. And everyone else here is merely just reading what is on the page. And that's
Mhm.
unfortunate because I think everyone in this movie is talented. I love
Mhm.
Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon. Like I said, I love McKenna Grace. I love Finn Wolfhard from what I've seen from him, but no one here just seems committed to the bit. Even
No.
Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, Melonitz in uniform. Like it's kind of a neat
Mhm.
little thing. It just feels like a passer. It just feels like a passing by.
Mhm.
It
I
doesn't feel
agree.
like anything. Yeah.
You know, I admittedly was a little disappointed that the villain here ended up being some sort of Sumerian god or whatever it
Mhm.
was, because Frozen Empire to me elicits the Detroit Red Wings. I thought that this was going to be the Ghostbusters chasing the ghost of Red Wings past and the empire that
Wow.
they created.
Wow. Wow.
That
Of
did not
course you
happen.
would. Well, that would be more interesting than what we got. We
It
just
would
get
be.
random white god villain. It's basically
Exactly. That would have been more interesting. That would have been the Frozen Empire I chose to write about. But
I
they
think you
didn't
should write
hire
a
me for
script,
this.
send it into Columbia, and see if they make a Ghostbusters 6, and it'll be a fix of this or something.
Frozen Empire too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, why? I will say this though about that. Now, I did not watch the animated show, so I don't
Same.
know what it's picking from to what you were saying earlier. I don't really know, but I do appreciate, even though in execution it's not handled with any assiduousness whatsoever, but I do appreciate at the very least it's something we haven't seen before. And
I appreciate that. And despite our criticisms here, I do appreciate the overall attempt at smallness with this one. That
Yeah.
like this is probably the most inconsequential Ghostbusters film of the 5 that we've seen. Like I said, it feels very episodic. I just don't think the execution takes advantage of that enough. It sort of reminded me of what I actually loved about Star Trek Beyond, which is actually my favorite of the rebooted Star Trek films. That's a
Mhm.
very episodic, kind of inconsequential film of those 3, but I think it utilizes it to its advantage, which I don't think
Yeah.
this one does. Like
Mhm.
the point I'm saying is I think movies that go for that smallness can absolutely work. I
Mhm.
like that this one maybe wants to do that, but I don't know. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
get there. I think it focuses on the wrong things to capture that
Yeah.
smallness.
Well, and again, I think there's a missed opportunity there as well because the results that we get at the end of the film, and again, spoilers, I guess, for the ending of this film. I
They saved the world.
feel awful. I've been very loose in this conversation, but yeah. To Brennan's point, we know how this is going to play out. So
Yeah.
but at any rate,
They play the song.
and then they play the song and credits. Let's go home. But there's a missed opportunity that because of what happens, this god unleashes all of these ghosts that they've captured, like 30 plus years of work to capture all these ghosts, gone in an instant. And they don't address that at all. Like, I just feel like there's opportunity to have fun there, given, the original cast is here. Obviously, they set the foundation with those first two. And I just feel like there's room in the sandbox to have some fun with that the film just overlooks.
Well, you make a great point because that's extra room for nostalgia baiting if it wants to go for that. Reference some of these old ghosts and creatures that were captured in the previous movies or something like that.
Yeah.
And you don't need an actor stand-in for that. I mean, like they go as far as to reference the same ghost at the library in this movie, and it feels like a one-off random moment.
Yeah.
But do that a bit more often if you want to take advantage of that nostalgia baiting a bit more. I think that's a good point.
Especially because we assume anyway, everything that took place in Afterlife, which is again the same ghosts from the first one, are they not in that same box that's unleashed? Like, so it's just out there again. If they want to do a third movie with the same villain, like, is that just out? So it's like it undoes everything that happened in Afterlife.
I guess that's a good point. I guess it kind of does. I didn't really think that far into it, but okay, maybe.
Yeah, so
this movie sucks.
Yeah, it just feels like there's they didn't think through this at all. Is I guess what I'm trying to say.
I mean, we already said that Afterlife wasn't well thought out in its initial setup. So yeah, I don't like these movies. I just don't.
Well, and I don't know, and that's the thing. Like, maybe I'm thinking too hard about those details. I don't know. But I just feel like there's missed opportunities there. And,
I'm with you.
And maybe
the whole film feels like that to me.
Maybe I feel that way because these movies do take themselves seriously, way more than the 80s movies. If it was more loosey-goosey and we're just having fun, then okay, I can meet you on that vibe.
It doesn't have the irreverence anymore, and I do kind of miss that.
Exactly, I agree.
Yeah.
At any rate, any final thoughts?
No,
here?
I'm surprised we went 34 minutes on this already.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't really have too much to add here. It's overstuffed and it's not compelling enough. There are interesting things here. I just wish the film devoted more time to it. Like Phoebe and Melody. I just wanted the whole film to be about them.
Yeah. Of the 5 movies, and we're including Paul Feig's film, which is not really part of the franchise, but it's still a Ghostbusters film. How do you rank the 5 then? Are you with me that it's in release order, or do you still slightly like Afterlife more than that one?
Man, I will say this: Empire is last for sure.
Yeah,
I'm probably 1, 2, and again, the disparity between 1 and 2 is not very much for me, if anything at all.
Yeah, it's pretty
1, 2.
tight.
Maybe Afterlife, like Afterlife in 2016, like I could flip a coin. I would maybe go Paul Feig because like I think that's more Ghostbusteries than these last two.
I think it captures the spirit and the irreverence of those first 2 films. And if Chris Hemsworth is amazing.
I was gonna say, like, I really like that cast. And so like I get way more laughs from that film than these last 2 for sure. So like it's a little messier, but it captures the spirit. And I guess in hindsight, because of these last 2, I think I appreciate 2016 Ghostbusters even more.
Yeah.
Because it's at least irreverent and it has the tone. Like it does more things right. So yeah, I'd say, in order. I'm with you. Release order.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
All right. Yeah. JD and Brendan once again agreeing on everything.
Yeah. And recently I feel like we haven't We haven't been. This is like the first one in a little bit. It feels
Actually, that's
like.
a good point. We've been off.
We
It's
have
great.
been a
It's great to
little
find
off.
ourselves back home a little bit.
Exactly. At any rate, that's Ghostbusters Afterlife. See, we're just
You're keeping that in. Do not edit that out. That just proves how forgettable this movie is.
I got Afterlife on the brain. Frozen Empire. Yeah, no one's going to remember this movie.
No, it's unfortunate.
Look,
And for
I will
those-
say this.
Yeah.
We've been pretty hard on it. I know some people have had fun with this, and if you have, I'm glad that you
That's what
had
I was just
fun
gonna
with
say.
this.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, especially for those who grew up watching the cartoon, The Real Ghostbusters, and found some connectivity between that and this, and you were able to appreciate for those reasons. I mean, I wish I could see what you're seeing. I really do,
Mhm.
and I'm glad it's working for you. I'm not there. I don't have that same relationship with it.
Yeah, I don't either, but I do hope that people enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like my crowd seemed to enjoy it mostly anyway.
Okay, that's good.
There was reaction from my crowd throughout the film, so
Mm,
I do
okay.
think it will connect with a broader audience. You know, we just talked about Immaculate with Dave Giannini,
Yeah.
and that review should be out by the time this one goes out.
Mhm.
And in that conversation, he was talking about how we see so many more movies than
We do. Yeah.
than the layman.
Yeah.
And because of that, our expectations vary comparatively to the mainstream audience. But I at the same time, I don't want to dumb down the mainstream audience because I do think audiences generally are smarter than studios give them credit for.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you.
Now, that said, where Ghostbusters Frozen Empire falls and all of that, maybe a lot of people will just meet it on its level. Recognize that it's not the greatest thing in the world, but just have fun with it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fair.
And if that's what they're looking for, maybe they'll get it.
Yeah. And I think in its opening weekend, this made like what, $65 million worldwide? Something like that.
Yeah. I guess that's fine, I guess, for a movie like this.
Yeah. I mean, because I
don't
think
know.
its budget was here. I have it here. $100 million. So
Well, we'll see how much it sinks. You know, if
Yeah.
there's a huge drop off, then we have a problem here.
then it's a problem.
Which
so
which
we'll
I
see.
think I actually, I said that money there was fine for how much it made, but given the fact that it has to compete against Godzilla X Kong next weekend, I think this is going to fall. I think this is going to fall.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. I don't think it's going to fare well in the next couple of weeks.
No. I
So
think it's,
we'll
I think
see.
it's gonna drop.
But yeah.
It's gonna freeze.
68.5 million worldwide at this point.
Actually, yeah, it's not very good. I didn't know its budget was that high. I guess I thought it was less than that. It's a cheap looking movie.
And to I guess emphasize, because I didn't note it earlier, for Afterlife worldwide 204 million. Worldwide 204.
Yeah, not the
Uh,
greatest, but a lot different than what this movie's tracking right now.
Yeah. And that budget was 75 million. So a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
A
Okay.
little bit less, but made more. This is tracking to have obviously a higher budget and probably make less.
Made more, or was made for more and made less. Told you, diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns. That's
yeah.
the moral of the story here.
So if Ghostbusters 6 comes out, it's gonna be called Ghostbusters Diminishing Returns.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It turns out that when the studios try to simply pander for nostalgia's sake, it doesn't always work out.
Yeah, it's not
Doesn't
just
always
this
work
movie.
out.
There's a lot of evidence of that, isn't
Yeah.
there? Yeah,
There is.
yeah.
At any rate, I think we can go ahead and end the episode there.
I think so. Good stuff.
Again, I'll just reiterate, if you enjoyed it, if you liked it, I'm glad you did. It just
Yeah.
wasn't for me. I just find
Same.
myself apathetic on it. But if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here and want to reach out to us, please let us know. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can reach out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com as well. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, write and review us. Really helps out the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's it. Anything else, Brian? Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Podcasting makes me feel good.
Yeah, it's good to have you back.
Yeah.
We're 2 reviews and a main show this week. Man.
Yeah, we're
killing it.
busy again, aren't we?
We're killing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So looking forward to Godzilla and Kong this weekend. We'll have that.
Yeah.
And yeah, should be interesting to see how that's another franchise with diminishing returns.
Yeah,
we'll see how
I feel like
this one fares.
I feel like that's another one I've also kind of of the 4 in the MonsterVerse. I'm release order. I think is my ranking of it.
I think that's fair. I think box office wise, those have done better, much better than Ghostbusters, though.
Yeah, well, it also has Godzilla -1 and the reputation of that on its side too. So there's
I'm curious how much of a lift Godzilla -1 gives this one.
Yeah,
maybe not much, but maybe something.
I'm really interested in seeing the box office numbers more than anything else when it comes to Godzilla and Kong. I'm actually more interested in the box office numbers than the critics score, which is kind of a rarity for me.
It's going to be interesting because I anticipate that it'll get middling reviews as they all do.
Yeah.
But could it get a lift from Godzilla? That'll be curious to watch. For sure.
If it does get a lift because of that, I'd call that a victory.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of Godzilla, because when we talked about Dune, we noted that it was going to have little competition up until Godzilla.
Yeah.
And that currently sits at $579 million worldwide.
That's amazing for a nearly 3-hour movie once again. So
yeah. So
Warner Brothers getting another hit on their hands.
Yeah, they did very well.
They did
very well. So it seems as if it had no competition.
Yeah,
until
for real.
We were right about that. Until Godzilla. So, at any rate, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Maybe Ghostbusters is best left in the 80s.
I think it's done. I think it's been busted.